Hey, Crispin, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I appreciate you taking time. I know that these things are always a whirlwind. And so I'm curious, do roles sort of speak to you? I mean, you've been over your career, you've kind of gained this ideal of the certain roles that you take, and everybody's always curious about what you're going to do next and what you're going to bring to it. How do you pick and choose what you're going to do next? Is there a method to that?
I guess it's been, well, I started acting professionally at age 13. There are different patterns throughout these decades as to how or why things have come along. Age 13 to 20, I probably, particularly age 13, it was like, well, if I was in a commercial or a TV show or a movie, whatever, it was kind of like, oh, it'd be neat to be in something. My father's an actor, and my mother retired as a dancer and actress when I was born, so I'd grown up in the industry. It was a decision I had made on my own. I wasn't pushed into it to be involved in the industry. And then my parents were supportive. But it was a relatively prudent decision to make it it was a prudent business decision to make at a relatively young age. And it's one that I'm glad that I did. Then basically from age 20, after Back to the Future had come out all the way through the 80s and 90s, I felt kind of an obligation toward finding material that somehow psychologically reflected what my own interests were. And the first film that I acted in after Back to the Future came out was River's Edge, which is a film I'm still proud of to this day. Most of the films I acted in the 80s and 90s subsequent to River's Edge didn't necessarily reflect what my psychological interests were, and they did not necessarily make that much money, and that was not necessarily that good for my acting career. I don't regret that time period. It still kind of carved out a persona, so to speak, which is essentially kind of with me to this day, and I'm basically comfortable with that. Then, in the year 2000 specifically, I needed to fund the second film in the trilogy, It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine. The main actor in it had a severe case of cerebral palsy, and he was getting older. By the time we shot his film, it became apparent if we didn't shoot anything soon, we would never get to shoot anything at all. And it was around that time that the first Charlie's Angels film was coming to me, and I realized with the money that I could make from that film, I could put it straight into funding Stephen C. Stewart's film. And that's exactly what happened. Now, it wasn't the only reason that I acted in that film. Even knowing about it, I was reluctant. At first, I had read the screenplay, and the character that I played in that film, when I played it, I didn't say anything in the movie, but the character originally had dialogue when I read the script, and it was very expositional and therefore not needed. And I wasn't necessarily going to go in on the movie, but they were quite insistent on asking me, wanting to know what my thoughts were and wanting to have a meeting. So I went in and they asked me what I thought, and I said whether I played the character or not, I felt like it would be better for the character to just be a silent, fighting, antagonistic character. And McGee, the director, who can be very enthusiastic, stood up and said, "That's great. That's exactly what we're going to do. That's how we're going to do it." And then they showed me the footage of the Chinese fighting team that were going to do the choreography for it, who had great history in cinema and understanding the psychology behind the character. And I realized with them essentially choreographing this silent fighting character could actually be very interesting. And so I was very glad to do the film, and I ended up having a very good time. I had a lot of influence on that character, and I was pleased with how it came out. The film made a lot of money, and that was good for my acting career. I got offered Willard, which was an interesting part, and that still to this date, that's the only time I played the lead role in what would be called a studio film. And it was an excellent, interesting part to get to play. So I realized that at that point, really how I needed to be thinking about acting in films, was accepting roles, essentially was that which would continue being able to let me fund my own features. You know, I'm on year 9 of touring with What Is It? It Is Fine, Everything Is Fine, which I funded, and I self-distribute these films by playing live, 2 different live shows that I perform before the shows. And really, from the year 2000 to the year 2010, that was, I did by far most of the films that I was offered. Not every single film, but most of them. And then in 2010, after Alice in Wonderland came out and Hot Tub Time Machine, which both did well, particularly Alice in Wonderland, which is the highest grossing film I've ever been in. And then I played a character in a Polish language film where takes place in 1918, and I play a German-speaking character that's a telepath. And it was very complex German dialogue. I don't speak German, and it was quite a lot of work. It was very difficult memorization work. But as you can see, the way that I am choosing to do things is it changes. Sometimes I've got to work because I need to bring in income, and sometimes coincidentally, interesting roles come at that point. Sometimes I feel like I've got to be more discerning, and sometimes things flow more. It's hard to predict. But specifically with The Bagman, it was because of the dialogue. It was well written, and then it was clear to me as soon as I read it what this character should be.
Past the dialogue, there's something that the character brings that we seem to know how your mind works in these roles, and like you said, finding the psychology behind these characters. How much of that did they bring you in and say, okay, just here's the dialogue, now create the character, or was there specific details of micromanaging how they directed you to do that?
When David Grovich, the director, he also was involved in the writing. He actually, after I accepted it, he kind of was wanting to expand the scenes with more dialogue, and he wrote it out. I kind of said I didn't think it was necessary right away. We talked on the phone, because I liked the dialogue the way it was written. And it started to go into realms that were not quite as concise as what the original dialogue was, and I asked to keep it with the dialogue that it was, and we did. That was what we shot. What I liked about the dialogue was that it was concise enough, at the same time leaving enough breathing room or thinking room underneath it as to that it could mean various things. That is rare. You don't actually get that a lot. Sometimes, but pretty rarely.
Yeah, and I know John Cusack kind of seems to work in that same sort of themes and rhythms. The scenes that you guys had together, it seems like to me you guys would be able to do that pretty quick in a take or two because you had these same rhythms. How was it working with him, and did you guys have to dialogue about each scene, or did you just dive in and allow each of your minds to just kind of meld that way?
It depended on the scene. Some scenes it seemed relatively apparent to me what the interpretation should be, and I stuck with that interpretation, but we did a fair amount of takes, and you give some variation in that as well. But there were certain scenes that one scene I'm thinking of in particular that it felt like there were multiple ways to interpret it, and we played around with interpretations of the same dialogue, and that was interesting also. But it was for me not an improvisational. I mean, not in the standard term of what you call improvisation. When you typically think of improvisation as being actors kind of coming up with words. And I'm comfortable with that, actually, the way that I learned to act. But I don't know about the other actors. It might be that other people were improvising in other scenes that I'm not aware of. But in our scenes, we basically stuck with the dialogue.
As always, you take what could be considered a small role and make it very memorable, as you always do. And Crispin, we really appreciate your time today. Best of luck on this and on the new endeavors,
well,
especially your work with your father. We're really excited about that.
If people want to find out more about that, CrispinGlover.com is the website that they can just go look at, or there's a newsletter they can sign up for as well.
Perfect. I know we will because we're all big fans. And again, appreciate your time and best of luck with this.
You too. Thanks a lot.